Okay, that's already working. Let's share my screen. Hello, everybody. Why doesn't it? Yes, this should work like this. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the seminar. The title of the seminar, The Attention of Ethics, Zen and the Art of Dealing with the Attention Economy, can be taken quite literally because that's what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, why doesn't this work? Yes. I'll be talking about attention economy through the lens of a very interesting analysis by ESDiT based on the work of Dominique Bouillet on 4 attention regimes in the attention economy. And an attention regime is thought of as a collective force working or laboring our attention. And with our, I mean the user's attention. So when we talk about attention economy, it's going to be mainly about the perspective of the user, not so much the big tech companies. Secondly, Zen and the Art of is very often a mock title. In this case, it's a little bit more serious. It really is about Zen Buddhism, because I noticed how in Zen Buddhism, in its practice and its philosophy, very similar attention regimes occur, even though with a very different function. And particularly, I will be discussing a passage from the Genjo Koan by the 13th century Zen philosopher Dogen Kigen. When it's about the art of dealing, my main thesis here is going to be that mindfulness, that to which Buddhism, certainly in the West, is very often reduced, won't matter enough. So we'll be needing something more than just mindfulness, which is going to be ethics, the attention of ethics, in particular, ethics as an attention practice in itself. And I'll be discussing that in the end. I hope there's enough time for that. As seeing as a thing. Now, this sounds very vague, but if we dig in it a bit more deeper, it'll become very clear. So first of all, the attention economy's attention regimes. In his book, The Ecology of Attention, or Pour une écologie de l'attention, ESDiT distinguishes 4 attention regimes. The first is loyalty. Loyalty means staying tuned, spending enough time behind the screen, on the apps, on the platforms, so that what we are supposed to do as users is be a loyal user of the attention economy. But that's just one of the regimes. Another one of the regimes is almost the opposite. It's not about being loyal, it's about being distracted all the time. And he calls this the regime of alertness. So signals pop up, constantly asking for our faculties of attention and breaking down our faculties of attention because of this constant short-term and interrupted attention spans. Citon describes this alertness regime as the most important, or at least the most dominant form of attention regimes in the attention economy. I, for my part, will defend the next one, projection regime, as something that is just as important. With the projection regime, what is meant is a view on reality and the self, so the user's self, projected onto our experiences, so not to pay too much attention to aspects of our experiences that do not fit in the attention economy. So this is about a sense of who you should be, or who you think you want to be, or who you think reality, or even better, what life is meant to be, what is living the real life. That is a projection regime that the attention economy uses as well. We will discuss this in greater detail a bit later. First, the 4th regime is the immersion regime. And Citon describes this interestingly as a joyful touristic dive into the ever-changing experiences and details. So you keep on scrolling, you keep on surfing, you keep on looking for new things and things that pop up, as in a hedonistic, a joyful, pleasant way of being. So those are 4 attention regimes, 4 ways in which attention is practiced in the attention economy, according to Yves Citon's analysis. Now, this in itself, I find already very interesting. I'm relatively new to this analysis, and as I read it, I vaguely started to think, I know this. I know these 4 attention regimes, but not from this analysis. I know these 4 attention regimes from a totally different source, namely Zen Buddhism. Which is weird because Yves Citon, who is very critical of the attention economy, describes these 4 attention regimes as ways of grasping, of limiting, and even harming our proper attention faculties. Now, of course, Zen Buddhism, or Buddhism in general, is very much equated with attention, but a kind of attention that is at least supposed to be liberating our lives, or making them better or more noble or more joyful and freer. So how do these 2 relate to each other? And maybe Zen attention economies might be a good way to deal with the harming effects of the attention economies regimes. So that was my start point, and I started developing, looking into that relation. Now, I have to say, all of this, what I'm saying here, is pretty experimental. I mean, it means it's still a work in progress. So I'm finding my way into this, and it's pretty challenging to presenting new material like this already to an audience. So I hope we can have a chat about this later on. The Zen Buddhist attention regimes, there are all kinds of ways in which you could talk about attention in Buddhism. And I want to take out one particular one that I'm fairly acquainted with, especially in my days as a Zen monk, in which a passage like this, 4 sentences, was repeated like on a monthly basis. It's a passage from Dogen Kigen's Genjo Koan. Genjo Koan means something like the great matter at hand, the most important thing to be realized. 13th century text, and in that text we find 4 sentences that I would like to relate to Citon's attention regimes. So, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by the myriad things. And to be verified by the myriad things is to drop off one's own body and mind, and the body and mind of the myriad things. Now, I imagine that these sentences, to increasing degree, are rather hermetic, but if we compare these 4 sentences with the attention regimes as described by Citon, something to become clear. The first sentence is pretty self-evident. To study the Buddha way is to study the self, which means you don't go about reading text, you don't go about doing rituals or magic or study God. Even all those things can occur within, and do occur within a Buddhist tradition. The real thing about Buddhism is to study the self. And that's already the beginning of the loyalty regime. You keep returning, whatever happens, you keep returning to paying attention to what you are doing, to what is happening within you, your experiences, your inner workings. And in meditation, for instance, this is put to a great extreme when you, for instance, take just one point, the breathing or the contact of the thumbs, or whatever point in your body or in your mind that you can use as a reference point or a focus point to keep coming back to loyally to whatever happens. But to study the self, Dogen goes on, is to forget the self. And forgetting the self is a nice description of what we'd call the alertness regime of Buddhism, and which we might be more familiar with the term mindfulness. So to forget the self means that you look within, but you're not looking for a true self or your soul or authenticity. Rather, you open yourself up to the many, 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 many things that happen within you and that do not really form a solid unit. So in this way, the idea of non-self, you forget the self by looking into yourself, is a very important key element in Buddhism. And this is about mindfulness, the alertness regime. It doesn't stop there, because if it was just about forgetting the self, to see that you are not really somebody, Buddhism would just be merely a nihilistic philosophy. The point is, it's a practice. And if you practice in this way, if you practice, you focus in your mindfulness, things happen to you. And you, as Dogen says, you are verified by the myriad things. Now, this is a very poetic way of putting that. And I would like to think of that as a projection regime. This is a moment described as awakening. When you look at things within and you see that they're ever changing and that they're always influencing each other or influenced by something else, and that nothing of what happens within you is really eternally blissful. It's just a lot of things going on and going on and going on. You can see that the outside things are like that as well. And in that way, you can see that whatever you look at, whatever happens to you, whatever happens in the world, is a verification of that kind of thing that you are. That is a non-self, a cloud of interactions in which you can have some influence, but you're not totally in control. That is the projection regime of Buddhism. That is the way of looking at the world and coming to terms with that and becoming really intimate with that, be verified by that view, is what Buddhism calls awakening. Now, Dogen, interestingly, does not end there. He puts on a fourth sentence, and he says to drop off, to be verified by the things, is to drop off body and mind of oneself and of the things. Now, this is very Dogenite thinking. Drop off body and mind is what, to Dogen, is what meditation should be, what Zen meditation should be. And I think of that as in terms of Citon's immersion regime. You really drop yourself in the awareness, in the experience, or in the cloud of experiences of meditation, and you just drop everything. You don't even get attached to awakening experiences or insights. You just submerge in the experience of inner and outer things. So looking at this, we can see those four kinds of paying attention, those four kinds of attention regimes practiced in Zen Buddhism in terms of Citon. Now we can do the other way around as well. We can describe Citon's analysis of the attention regime in a Dogenite form, and this would give us something like this. To participate in the attention economy is to stay tuned to the channels. That's the loyalty regime. To stay tuned to the channels is to be probed by various signals. That's the alertness regimes. To be probed by signals is to be verified by the myriads of online experiences. These online experiences, and I will discuss that later on, they verify us as something that we are supposed to want to be. And lastly, to be verified by the myriad online experiences is to drop off the solidity of yourself and of online experiences. This is the immersion into scrolling, surfing, and so on. The last line is pretty, I agree, pretty mysterious, and I will not go into great detail into that, because I want to focus on, first of all, Citon, who says, the whole thing, the main dominant thing of the attention economy is to be probed by signals, the alertness regime. But if we take at least this formula serious, we can say that to be probed by signals is to be verified by the myriads of online experiences. So if we want to understand what this alertness regime is about, we need to look at the projection regime as what do the myriad of online experiences verify us? That becomes the question. That becomes the question of the attention of ethics. Why mindfulness won't matter? This is no, I'm not against mindfulness in any way. I'm just saying here that mindfulness won't matter enough. The alertness regime won't matter enough for us to change our dealings with the attention economy, is certainly not in its harmful way or the way it harms our attention. Because there is an ethics of attention to whatever regime you're in. And the ethics of attention in the attention economy, I don't think we need to look very far from that. It is pure and simple the consumer ethics that we live in our capitalist society. Of course, this is not about all that we do on online, or for instance now in this Zoom meeting. This is strictly about the attention economy, and in this we are treated as consumers and supposed to be consumers. And the consumer ethic is not new. It's not invented by the attention economy or the internet. It goes all the way back, at least if we follow the very interesting analysis by Colin Campbell in his book, The Romantic Ethic in the Spirit of Modern Consumerism. It goes all the way back to Romanticism and even its predecessor, sentimentalist deism, and that's the early 18th century, in which in reaction to the Protestant ethic and in reaction to the beginning of modern sciences, the sentimentalist deists, like the Earl of Shaftesbury, said that, well, we shouldn't be looking for truth or authenticity or liberation or grace or God or whatever in logic or rationality, nor in, as the Protestants are supposed to do, in working and then see if you're saved or not. But we have to find our truth in our sentiments. That's the gateway to how we can find truth in God and ourselves, our sentiments. Taste became a new word. It was no longer just a sense of the tongue, but it was a sense of the soul, to see the difference between authenticity and fakeness, between what is truthful and what is not, and what is deep and what is shallow. And things, another word that came about in those times was the picturesque. It was the difference between the ability of, it was about the ability of seeing something deep and picturesque and authentic in a scenery with a winding road and a cabin, where other people would just see something cumbersome in a badly built cabin. A deep person, a sensitive person, would see a picturesque landscape. Now, this gave way to the romantic ethic, and this romantic ethic gave way to modern consumerism. I can't spell out the whole thing, the whole analysis of Campbell, but it comes down to the fact that fashion and the consumer society helped us to be able to express our sentiments, to express the sense that we are deep, that we really are alive, that we feel the urge to buy this and not that, and wear this and not that. And this kind of sensitivity, even though sentimentalist deism gradually lost its hold of society, that sentimentality, that sense of I'm truly alive when I consume, is still a powerful heir of that kind of theology. And that is still with us. So if that is the projection regime, the almost hidden projection regime, then mindfulness in itself won't help. And I agree here with Slavoj Zizek's critique on Western Buddhism some 10 years ago. And I would also agree that Slavoj Zizek's knowledge and understanding of Buddhism is very, very, very limited. But he has a great point when he says that although Buddhism presents itself as a remedy to the stressful tension of capitalist dynamics, allowing us to uncouple and retain inner peace and Gelassenheit, it actually functions as its perfect ideological supplement. So what he says here is by being mindful, by letting go, by accepting, by just watching what happens within us and not without us, then we become accomplices. We become collaborators to the capitalist or consumerist ethics. So this consumerist ethics, or this consumerist spirit, because it is the spirit of modern consumerism, it is about what gives us meaning in life, is a covert projection regime directing our attention. And this is something that we need to focus on in particular, I feel. The way we can do this is not only to think of ethics of attention, but of the attention of ethics, which is what this talk is all about. Attention of ethics I mean that ethics as a practice of attention, ethics as a kind of looking, a way of looking at yourself and at the world. And it is really a practice. It's not a great academic theory that has to be developed here. It's really a practice with very clear and sometimes very obvious things to keep bringing to mind. For instance, first of all, we need to acknowledge that we harbor a consumerist projection regime within us. If we don't acknowledge that, or if we don't agree with that, well, then we can't work in this way. So acknowledge we harbor a consumerist projection regime within us. Spot it, catch ourselves in the act while we're doing it, and acknowledge it. Secondly, to realize that we're always involved in some kind of projection regime. To be paying attention always entails having a projection regime, a framework, a way of looking at things, and a way of presenting an ideal of how to be a human being. Thirdly, have to be aware of the fact that projection regimes can and will change. Our consumerist projection regime once got established, and at one point in history, it may become unestablished, and something else might come of it. Fourthly, we need to keep in mind that replacing a projection regime is an intense process. It is a practice, and it's a very tough practice. It's really not a matter of just saying, all right, I know there's a consumerist projection regime, now I drop it, and now I'm free from it, and I will look at things as they are. This won't happen. First of all, because of the second point, there is always some projection regime that we use, and projection regimes are very strong patterns, and patterns, they are like living things. They want to stay alive. They don't want to be replaced. They don't even want to be looked at. And that's the fifth point. We have to expect great resistance, great reluctance on the part of the projection regimes that we've adopted, that we identify with, due to our fear of lacking any meaning-generating framework in our lives. I remember one of the speakers in this series somewhat mentioned a very small but very relevant example when she said, well, nobody can tell me how many cat movies on Facebook I can watch. You know, I will decide this for myself. And even though I can fully sympathize with that argument, I think most of us can, we can also wonder, well, who is actually watching those cat movies? Is it the individual? Is it the autonomous individual? Or is it the projection regime that says, well, get as many as fun and interesting and captivating experiences as you can, because as much as you consume, the more you consume, the more you are alive. So what we need, I think, is rather than just criticizing our projection regimes, because they will just, resist and become even stronger, we need to replace them with projection regimes that work better. Now, you can't say this in a lecture and then not try to present something. And at the same time, if I were to present something, I will now present to you the new projection regime that you all should follow. That's highly presumptuous. But I will nonetheless try and offer you something based on Buddhist materials and regular or Orthodox Buddhist material, as something you might be interested in experimenting with, not as a great theory, but really as invitations for practice. I would call this not mindfulness, but matterfulness. Matterfulness in the sense of keeping an eye on that what matters, on the great matter. And I will refer to this as seeing as a thing, because I want to be inspired by this Dogonite sentence to be verified by the myriad things. What do I want to be verified as, and by what things? Now, I've been experimenting with this for some time, And me being me, I'm being rather playful in these matters. And I've already found 11 meanings of the word thing, or associations with the word thing, with which I'm building this practice for myself for the time being. But 11 is way too much, and a lot of them are really not academic. So I'm just going to restrict myself to 3 meanings of the word thing that might verify us in another way, in another projection regime. First of all, thing as an object. That's the usual way we use the word thing. So not as a being, but as an object. There is a famous Zen poem, or amongst Zen Buddhists, there's a famous Zen poem by Chantung Rojin, who was Dogen's teacher. And he advises his disciples or his monks to sit. It's a meditation poem, to sit like a wind bell. That's the thing. You should sit like so. And he says the entire body is a wind bell hanging in empty space. Empty space in Chinese just means also the air, so in heaven. So the entire body is a wind bell hanging in empty space. Whether the wind blows from the north, the south, the east, or the west, the bell always brings forth the sound of wisdom. Ding, 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 ding. As it happens, ting, which is close to thing, means concentration in Chinese, and ding is the sound of a bell in English, but that's just playful. Nonetheless, this is a poem very strongly about this loyalty regime. It is about whatever happens, no matter where the wind blows, you always do the same thing. You return to your posture, you return to your point of focus, and this way, a clear and calm and equanimous and beautiful mind can come about that does ting, 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 ting. That's just one way of sitting or seeing as a thing. Another one, also as a thing, as an object, is about the alertness regime. And there you have the Buddha, so very early Buddhism, talk to his monks and advise them to think of themselves, or to think of whatever happens within them, as the same thing that happens to grasses, sticks, branches, leaves when they're burnt. So if somebody burns grasses, sticks, branches, and leaves, are you fretting over it? Are you saying, oh, this is happening to us? No, the monks say, because this is not us. You know, those things do not belong to ourselves. And the Buddha says, well, so too, monks, give up what is not yours. What is it that is not yours? Corporeality, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness are not yours. You're giving them up, will for a long time bring you welfare and happiness. So what is he saying here? He's saying those things that you feel within you, the inner workings, those things that you mostly identify very strongly with, look at them as things. Look at them as things in the way you look at things in the outer world. And this will bring you welfare and happiness. That's the alertness. That's the mindfulness thing. There's another way we can use the word thing, and thing as an undefined object. You know, give me that thing, or even in a derogatory way toward a person. Thingy just came in. That's not a very nice way to speak of people. But in the Zen context, this thing as an undefined object, something that is looked at so intensely, so purely, that you cannot even name it, or cannot even label it, and it is just this, is a token of, or an expression of, the highest form of awakening. So already in the 6th or 7th century, Dao Xin claims that walls, fences, tiles, and stones preach the Buddha teachings. So anything around you is a preaching of the Buddha. And Dongshan, taking leave of his teacher Yunyan, says, well, later on, if I'm asked to describe your teachings, how should I respond? What should I say what do you teach? And after a pause, Yunyan says, and this is important because in Zen text, teachers hardly ever take a pause. They're supposed to be very wild and spontaneous. But this here, Yunyan takes a pause. So that means something very, very, very important is going to be said. And he says, just say, this is it. Or in other translation, just this. Now, this is the immersion regime. You look at things so deeply, so in detail, that they lose their solidity, that you lose your solidity, and you become not really one, but you are part of this cloud of being. This being said, all of the quotes that I just gave contain projection regime material. The wind bell was not just about being concentrated, it really explicitly mentioned wisdom of emptiness. It was hung up in emptiness, and it presents the sound of wisdom. And Prajaparamita is a particular way of portraying Buddhist wisdom. The leaves quote, so when the Buddha says, look at yourself the way you look at leaves, was not just saying, just look at yourself and see what happens. He really offered a model, the 5 bundles: corporeality, feeling, sensation, consciousness, and mental formations. And that served the purpose. He asked his disciples to look at those 5 elements, 5 aspects of the self, to find out that there's no such thing as a self. There are only bundles. There are only things happening, things going on, and they either belong to either of these 5 bundles, and none of them really creates a sense or a soul or something fixed. So this was an alternative model to look at the self and to come to a sense of meaning in life than the one that was prevalent back then in India, which was to sit down, to find your soul, and if you find your soul, then you find God or Brahma, and then you're enlightened. So the Buddha was very critical of that, and rather than this macrocosmic image of me looking and finding my true self, and through that true self finding the truth of all, rather presented a mesocosmic way of looking at things in codependent arising. Everything is a flux. Everything is a pattern within a pattern within a pattern within a pattern, not forming oneness, not forming bits and pieces, but forming clouds of interactions. And the same even with this just this answer by Yuyan, said just answer, just say just this. This also can be seen as a pun. I don't read or write any Japanese, unfortunately, or Chinese. But one English commentator said that this sentence could also be read as just this man of Han, just this Chinaman. And this was a way of a fixed formula in a court of law in which somebody pleaded guilty. So it was a formula of saying, I'm responsible. Now, this wisdom of emptiness, this codependent arising, this being responsible within the interaction, within relational life, is the projection regime of Buddhism. And I would suggest that we could think of that as thing in an old, very old English and Germanic meaning, as a gathering place for dealing with matters of concern. It's not the thing as we usually say it, but as Heidegger and later on certainly Bruno Latour developed, thing as a gathering place for dealing with matters of concern. That, I would say, would be a very interesting thing to be verified as by the various things. I want to skip that. Summarizing, ethics as an attention practice would mean that we pay attention to the great matter. The great matter would be based on the question, how can I be the best thing? How can I be the best place of interjunctions, of inward coming and outward going influences, as, to be Latourian again, as an actor network within actor networks? Now, this is a very different practical question than the one, how to be an autonomous individual versus big tech, how to be an autonomous individual versus state interference, of how to be an autonomous individual versus the moralist finger, you shall not look at cats' films. So that's what I mean with an ethics of attention, the practice of seeing ourselves as a thing, as a wind bell, as a bunch of leaves, as just this, and most importantly, as a gathering place for discussing the matter of concern. And a matter of concern is suffering in the world, its causes, and how to alleviate it. And that is what I wanted to share with you. I'm looking for a way to... But there you are.